Now, speaking of controversial decisions, as part of the newly proposed budget, the Israeli cabinet approving of the so-called public transport fee, aka the congestion tax, a proposal hoping to reduce the crazy daily traffic scene in and around Tel Aviv by charging rush hour drivers up to 37.5 shekels, or over $11 a day. But many critics are hoping to kill or at least heavily amend the bill, as the current public transportation infrastructure is incapable of handling a sudden surge of passengers. Additionally, the charges are expected to disproportionately harm lower-income Israelis. So in any case, here with more is value creation expert with the Academic College of Tel Aviv-Jaffa, Alex Coman. Dr. Coman, thanks so much for being with us now. The tax will not be enforced until at least 2024. Apparently, this is to provide some time to update the camera infrastructure in order to properly charge drivers. But as I said earlier, appropriate alternatives have not been provided. Even Transportation Minister Michaeli says so. So is the coalition putting the cart before the horse?
Well, I think the answer is not. First of all, I think that this amount that people are going to have to pay is not so high. We're talking about 20-something shekels. This is basically the price of it's less than the price of a bus ticket. But I also think that the government must change its priorities. And I think it is good for Israel that people, exactly, if I'm looking at this image of this terrible gridlock, it is good for people to come into the center of Israel using public transportation. And now this requires more trains, and I think this can be done. We've had some very clumsy management of the extension of the rail infrastructure and the bus infrastructure, but I think that these things can be managed. I do not think that we should lose hope. So you can have bigger trains, more effective trains. And as a result, rather than looking at this gridlock, and by the way, the gridlock is not just a problem of money paid by people driving into Tel Aviv to work in Tel Aviv. It's also a problem of health, because as you're driving in this heat and in this gridlock, this takes a toll on the drivers fighting their way to their work, fighting their way back home. I think it's much more convenient the way we see it all over the world, where people commute to work by train. I used to do this with 2 trains and a taxi in New York. And as a result, you arrive much calmer. So I wouldn't give up on the idea of actually improving dramatically.
Well, so let's talk about that, though, because again, the current gaps in the infrastructure are immense. There's not enough current infrastructure and public transportation to even handle the increased traffic. The buses and trains don't run often enough to begin with. For example, there are very few trains on Friday morning or Saturday night, even though that's not yet the Sabbath. Nearly none at odd hours. Buses are often late if they come at all, and there aren't enough lines to cover the whole country. What's being done to address all of these issues? I mean, you mentioned adding some trains, but that doesn't solve every problem I just raised.
No, it's not a silver bullet that will solve. But let me tell you something. When I look at the economy, I see a pendulum. Israel started as a socialist country, which means that very few people had cars in Israel, if I'm thinking about the 60s, 70s, etc. And then Israel moved into capitalism, which is a good decision. But as we moved into capitalism, we gave up on the idea that the country should take care of its citizens. Because buses were very abundant, were very frequent, very punctual. And I used to travel a lot on buses, whether it was to my military service or later on as a student. They were very reliable. So the current situation is not a deterministic situation that is inevitable. In the past, we had good infrastructure. We gave up on it. And the idea was people would buy cars and they would pay taxes through the nose to the government and for the petroleum. So the government would make a lot of money. I think we should move back from this situation. And I think it's possible.
All right. Well, I think now with these high hopes that you're leaving us is a good time to end it. Dr. Coman, thank you so much.
Thank you.